Hello YouTube and welcome back to another video. In today's video we have a Dell keyboard, we have a Dell mouse, and we have a Microsoft mouse. Starting off immediately, we're going to tackle the Dell keyboard. We're going to completely disassemble everything because everything can do with a deep clean, because who knows when these were last actually cleaned. So starting off, we're going to pull off all of the keycaps on the keyboard, and here is a montage showing just that. So yeah, this keyboard definitely has seen better days, and it's probably been a long time since it's had a good clean. Now, the Media Control Center keys can be removed once we actually disassemble the keyboard, so that's the next step. We'll have to disassemble it. On the back, there are actually a lot of screws that are keeping the keyboard together. What's even more surprising is that underneath the relatively clean back plastic housing, there is actually a metal plate inside that is keeping the keyboard together. Now this is actually pretty nice because some lower end keyboards don't have any metal in them at all. And with the remaining screws removed, we can take out both of the PCBs inside the keyboard as well as the metal plate itself and the media control buttons, so that way they get cleaned as well as the keycaps. Now with everything removed, we can actually begin cleaning the keycaps. Now the first step I did was actually just give the keycaps a quick rinse, because washing them with water real quick would help to remove any debris that would be stuck on them. So it's easier to do that real quick, drain the water, and then fill it up again with some warmer water and soap. And we'll return to the keycaps and give them a good clean individually. So moving on to the next thing, I went ahead and cleaned the back plastic housing of the keyboard, and the reason why I'm disinfecting this with isopropyl alcohol and not soap and water is because I actually want to keep the sticker on the back in as good of condition as possible. And I know it seems pretty silly, but the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to keep this in as good of condition as it could be, so to make it seem like it's still factory fresh, even though, well, at this point it isn't really. After that, I also went ahead and cleaned up the metal plate again with isopropyl alcohol, but this time because I do not want to introduce water to it, because clearly it has some tiny little rust spots along the edges and I don't want to further increase the rust. Now the next thing, the keycaps. And this took so long, you would not believe how long it actually takes. Now, the keycaps seem like they are pretty easy to do, and cleaning the first couple of ones is okay, but there are a lot of keys on a keyboard, and deep cleaning every single one, every single side of them with a brush takes so long, it's actually crazy. But it is so worth it because they actually turned out in basically brand new condition. So the last thing that we actually have left on the keyboard itself is what I'm going to describe as the main housing of the keyboard, because this is where all the keycaps sit, this is where all of the electronics actually go inside, and then everything screws into this part of the keyboard. So this is basically the keyboard without the keyboard. And I spent a very long time cleaning every single part of this, because this is the part of the keyboard where a lot of the dirt and debris gets trapped in, because it kind of forms a barrier between the rest of the components. And it was definitely the worst part of the keyboard in terms of how dirty it was, but it actually cleaned up very nicely. I'm surprised how well it actually looks now, because it honestly looks almost brand new. It's just really cool to see, because it was mainly just the debris making it look bad. The membrane part of the keyboard also wasn't really that dirty, but I went ahead and cleaned it as well with some isopropyl alcohol just to make sure that it was completely clean and dust free. And now it's time to take a look at the mice. So the first one is a Microsoft branded IntelliMouse Explorer, which is pretty interesting. And the other one is a pretty standard Dell branded mouse. It's a simple 2-button scroll wheel mouse, which is probably something that would have come with a pre-built. But the Microsoft mouse also has some additional side buttons, and the scroll wheel actually has some other features. Inside the Dell mouse, you can see it's pretty standard. It's literally just one PCB and everything hooks up to that. And inside, it was fairly clean, but around the part where the plastic pieces connect, that was by far the worst part of the mouse. Again, like the keyboard, we're going to give everything a good scrub with a brush, and we'll just leave it soaking in the water for a bit. Now, I did go ahead and wipe down the scroll wheel, but in the end I also put it in with the other parts in the sink to give it a wash. And the PCB, even though it seemed okay, I gave it a quick wipe down with isopropyl alcohol, and it seemed like there was some flux or something left over from the manufacturing process. I'm not sure if it was flux, but I went ahead and cleaned it anyways. Now at this point, the Dell mouse seems to be cleaning up pretty nicely, and again, all it needed was a good scrubbing after it was left to dry. Apart from the wear and tear on the plastic, it was pretty okay. Now the Microsoft branded mouse seems to be in better cosmetic condition. It doesn't seem like parts are as worn down as on the Dell one. And this one also has some sliding covers that I actually had to remove in order to get access to the screws that are keeping it intact. Now, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but getting this mouse back together was actually a bit more difficult than taking it apart. This one is fairly more complex than the Dell branded mouse because there's a lot of extra circuitry for the additional buttons, and the scroll wheel assembly is its own special thing. It was actually pretty easy to clean that as well, but it did take quite a while to get it in just right in the case. I did actually have to pry it out because it has some clips holding it in, and there was even a spring, so be sure to not lose that. And there was actually another screw holding the top plastic piece onto the main mouse assembly. Now, close up, the wheel was probably the worst part of this mouse. Plastic pieces were actually pretty okay, but again, just like the Dell mouse, putting everything in the sink, and by the time this is done, it actually turned out very nicely. So a lot of footage was filmed, and in the end I removed a lot of it because, well, it's just cleaning a mouse. But basically, this is how it looks like. You know, just giving everything a good cleaning with soap and then making sure that it basically looks brand new at the end of it. And after everything was thoroughly cleaned, just like the Dell mouse, I left it out to dry for a long time to make sure everything was free of water. And after that, the end result was actually pretty good. The scroll wheel itself was its own separate thing. It did accumulate a lot of debris as well, but it honestly wasn't that bad to clean because it was mainly just a couple of plastic guides and wheels holding it all together. And I did make sure to not put the actual PCB in water, but everything else that was just plastic was given a good clean, just like the main mouse assembly. And with everything at this point now clean, we can begin reassembly. So I was going to leave every single part of the reassembly process in the video, but I decided to go ahead and cut most of that because, well, it's basically the same thing again, and instead show some highlights of what happened. So the first thing that happened is that I completely forgot about the media control keys, and well, I had to disassemble the entire keyboard again just to put the keys and the membrane piece back in. That's the only unfortunate thing that set back a little bit of time, but otherwise it wasn't really that big of a deal. And once I got everything back in, then I reassembled the keyboard with all of these screws, which actually didn't take that much time. But at that point, basically, the keyboard was almost done. The only real time-consuming part was, again, the keycaps, because, well, you actually have to put in every single one of the keycaps in. And I also didn't clean the cable while it was still in a non-clean state because I wanted the keyboard itself to be clean first, and then with everything reinstalled back into the keyboard, I can easily clean the cable without putting any unwanted stress on the PCB itself. And now this is probably the, I guess, most satisfying part to see in the video, reassembly of all the keycaps. And just like cleaning all the keys, this took quite a while. And of course, before I disassembled everything, I took a picture of it so everything would go in its proper place. I guess the running theme in today's video is that, well, everything took a long time to make, and that montage was no exception, but the end result was certainly worth it. You may have noticed that the volume knob on this keyboard is actually missing, so I ended up making one out of 2 Lego tires and a Lego wheel, and surprisingly it works extremely well, and to this day it still works just fine. There really wasn't anything significant to say about the reassembly of the Dell mouse. It was by far the easiest thing to reassemble, and really the only thing that had to be put together was the wheel. And once the PCB just went into place and the cable was routed into position, the top half just snapped onto the bottom half. Again, there's only one screw holding this entire thing together, so once that was put in, it's done. Really, the only thing of significance is the cable itself was by far in worse shape compared to the keyboard, at least dirt-wise. But even with that, it cleaned up really well, and at this point, it looks almost brand new again. Now it's time for by far the, quote, easiest reassembly of the entire video. Now, the Microsoft mouse, it was actually really easy to disassemble, but for some reason, I had a couple problems while reassembling it, and at this point, it's already been reassembled, so it's not like much can be done. But this is where I do the first mistake. I attach the top part of the housing onto the main subframe without attaching the actual side piece that is also supposed to connect to it, which has the side buttons. The next thing, now it's not necessarily routing the cable throughout the bottom half of the chassis, but rather it's the top piece that connects the cable, specifically where it goes out of the mouse. For some reason, this gave me a lot of problems, and I spent a lot of time trying to get it in perfectly, but it just took forever to do for some reason. Apart from those things, it was relatively easy to put back together, and once the screws were put back in and the covers were put over the screws, the last thing that I had to do was to just clean the cable like the other 2 accessories, and the cable on the Microsoft mouse was actually relatively clean, so that didn't take that much time either. And there it is, the whole lineup of the mid-2000s PC accessories. So now we have fully cleaned and I guess you could say restored them to almost new condition. And there they are. They're all cleaned up, they're in a usable state again, and they're not disgusting to look at. The only reason why it took so long is because it takes a long time to clean these. They really do look 1,000 times better than they did before. Of course, minor things here and there, like the scroll wheel on the Microsoft mouse, the buttons on the Dell mouse, and the worn out keys on the keyboard, those aren't really that big of an issue. Honestly, I don't really care about that. I just need a usable keyboard and a usable mouse. Let's test these out once again, just to make sure that all our hard work was worth it. So I've got the Mac Mini set up here just to test them out. I'm going to plug them into the Cinema display because there's some USB ports on the back. But I will try out the USB ports on the keyboard itself. I'll plug both of the mice into it so that way we can make sure that the ports are working. We got green lights on the keyboard. We've got the red lights on the Microsoft mouse as well as the bottom. And the Dell mouse also lit up. Here's a test. Well, the keyboard seems to be working fine. Now we've got the Dell mouse. Yep, that's working fine. Yeah, that's working well too. I'm assuming I'm probably going to need drivers or at least some sort of software, preferably on a Windows system for the Microsoft mouse. I mean, it probably works on Mac as well. So it's been quite a while since I shot this footage here, but I figured I would give a quick update on how they actually work. And starting off with the keyboard works just fine. It's worked with every single thing I've used it with, and all the media control keys work. The volume knob, even that solution I made with the Lego tires, has been working great. Now, next, with the Dell mouse, that has also been working just fine. I haven't used it as much as the keyboard here, but it is working. The last thing, probably the most exciting thing, the Microsoft mouse, well, I'm actually using it right now. I have since moved over to using this mouse with my Mac Mini because, well, I wanted a wired mouse, and this one does have some additional buttons on the side. I'm using macOS Mojave, and the only reason why that's significant is because this is an older mouse, and the software is also pretty old. I'm pretty sure that the last update that this thing had was probably around 2012 or at the latest 2014, and if I click on it, you can see that it's not optimized for a newer macOS version. It doesn't even have a dark mode option. Apart from the software, which I'm sure would work great on something like XP, Vista, 7, an older version of Windows, I'm sure this would work great with, and I'm sure even an older version of macOS. So everything has been working great. It was definitely worth cleaning all of these because I have since gotten a lot of usage out of all of these accessories. The fact that they're just working after we've cleaned them all up means that I did not mess up. Everything seems to be up and running. That's going to wrap up this video. If you guys enjoyed it, then consider subscribing. If you guys want to, be sure to check out the other videos on the channel. And with that, thanks for watching.